Hello, this is David Bernstein, founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and I'm here with my partner in thought crime, Brandy Shufutinsky. Hi, Brandy.
Hi, David.
Okay, so we're here to talk about another non-controversial topic. Who are they anti-Semites? Who are anti-Semites? What constitutes anti-Semitism? When should we actually call somebody out for anti-Semitism? When should we give them the benefit of the doubt? When should we even label them the sort of scarlet letter of anti-Semite? Like they've gone that far. So we're going to explore some of this. This could really be actually, Brandy, peak contrarianism, because I'm not sure we see eye to eye on every one of these cases. So it'll be interesting. All right. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a philosophical rant first about this and say that we are the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. So to me, that means that we err on the side of speech. We err on the side of the free expression of ideas. We want people to be able to discuss things openly, and we want them to be able to take risks. And we don't want to be too quick in general to condemn somebody for racism or anti-Semitism or homophobia or anything else, because we know that that can place a chill on the conversation. So that's sort of in one compartment. The second, of course, is that we're in the business of calling out anti-Semitism when we see it. And we believe that the illiberalism on the left and the right has the potential of fueling anti-Semitism. So we want to be able to point that out. So there's a tension between those two goals that we have to navigate when we have conversations about anti-Semitism. On the one hand, not to shy away from anti-Semitism when we see it. On the other, not to be too quick to label somebody or something anti-Semitic when it could be more complicated than that. So I want to lay out sort of a 4-part test. Dan, if you wouldn't mind putting that up. Brandy may disagree with this, but we'll have plenty of time for that. So this is the way I think about it. Number one, is there an underlying ideology that gives a permission structure for anti-Semitism? In other words, I wrote a book called Woke Anti-Semitism. I am arguing that radical social justice ideology, in as much as it upholds this very strict hierarchy of privilege, is a permission structure for anti-Semitism. That doesn't mean that it's inherently anti-Semitic. In my view, it becomes almost inevitably anti-Semitic. In other words, when somebody talks about a hierarchy of privilege, they're not being anti-Semitic. They're just talking about something which I regard as dogmatic that can lead to that. Likewise, when somebody on the right talks about America first or about the replacement of immigrants, that's not necessarily anti-Semitic. It only becomes anti-Semitic when Jews are directly invoked. So I think there we can talk. I think we can have a lot of freedom and creativity and talking about ideologies as they may give rise to anti-Semitism, because we're not actually implicating anybody or anything directly. We're talking about this in the most sort of general sense and trying to provide evidence about whether or not it's real. The second one is, do these actions or remarks constitute sort of an anti-Semitic trope? Now, in this form, I would say that there are times when this can be complicated. We'll talk about George Soros and whether or not that's an anti-Semitic trope or not. And there may be different forms of it, and different people may use it in a different way. So I want to say that there are tropes, or there are statements that we generally associate with anti-Semitism that may or may not be anti-Semitic, and the person using them may or may not be cognizant that they're tapping into a trope that's sometimes associated with anti-Semitism. The third idea is, or the third form is, a very explicitly anti-Semitic statement. Somebody who said something that there's a wide consensus on that is anti-Semitic, and that we're not really going to call it anything else, under at least most of us aren't. The fourth are when somebody has made such a comment or taken such action where you can actually call them reasonably an anti-Semite. Now, I think even here, we want to be even more careful than we were on number 3. We want to be able to be very sure that the person, it wasn't a one-off, right? We want to make sure that this person really meant it, that the person really has animus toward Jews or trades in conspiracy theories about Jews. So I think here we want to give people the benefit of the doubt whenever possible. We don't want to saddle people with this scarlet letter of anti-Semitism when we don't have to. And we want people to be able to, in my view, step down from it. They show contrition. In other words, showing contrition for someone's anti-Semitic statements or racist statements it helps society, educate society to oppose these statements. So we don't want to hold people sort of permanently in account if we don't have to. So that's sort of my 4-part test. Now, Brandy, before we get into the nitty gritty of various people being anti-Semites or not, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think it's fair. I think the points you bring up are fair, and it gives guidance and a bit of a roadmap to determine whether somebody's anti-Semitic. My biggest question is intentionality. I mean, that's what I look at. People can make mistakes and engage in an anti-Semitic trope without being aware that it was that. When they become aware of it, that's when you have the apology and the contrition. Oh my goodness, that's not what I intended. Perfectly fair. I like your point about repeat offenders. If somebody does that continuously, then it's like, okay, 1, are you really sorry? And 2, can you really continue to plead ignorance when you're repeating the same trope that now you've become aware that it's actually anti-Semitic?
Yeah, there was this young kid in my high school class who one time used the phrase "Jew him down," and the teacher actually called him out on it, and it became very clear to me that the kid had no idea that this was an anti-Semitic slur. And so sometimes we have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think there's many examples of that. So all right. So I'm going to start with the first one that's been in the news lately. It is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who made some unfortunate remarks sitting with the New York Post, including a reporter that I know well. So Dan, why don't you put that up, and we'll actually listen to it real briefly. Dan, we can't hear it. But it's okay, Dan. Let's just I think many people have been exposed to it, so let's not try to get the audio right. What RFK Jr. said, and I'm sure you've all seen it by now, is that COVID was targeting Black and white people, but rendered Asians or Chinese people and Jews more immune from it. Now, that was an interesting, crazy statement to make. And Dan, you can take it off now, line. And a lot of people jumped and immediately called it anti-Semitic. I actually, first of all, I think it's noteworthy that he was probably drunk. There were people that were there who said that he had been drinking a lot. Does that mean that he was sort of, it loosened his lips, and as a result he said what was really on his mind? Or does that mean he's just drunk, and drunk people sometimes say stupid things? That's number one. I think it does fit the number 2 claim that I made, that this is an explicit anti-Semitic trope. I think what he said is an anti-Semitic trope. The 2 other things, though, he apologized for it. He showed genuine contrition. He pointed out that he is a big supporter of Israel, so that may give him some, credibility. Others would argue it gives him no credibility. All we're seeing is the pro-Israel anti-Semites, so we shouldn't give him any slack. The other thing is that RFK does trade in conspiracy theories. I mean, he is very sloppy in his thinking. And Gil Troy, who is a professor at McGill, wrote an excellent article in the Jewish Journal about it, saying that this is sort of a product of a sloppy mind. And I'm sort of inclined to go with that and to say, look, the guy apologized. It's a product of a sloppy mind. The guy engages in all kinds of conspiracy theories. I think what he said was problematic and anti-Semitic, but I don't think we need to go around calling him like a hardened anti-Semite now that happened. What do you think, Brandy?
I disagree with you. I think, and it's not because of this one statement. Mel Gibson was also drunk when he went on his rants against Black people and Jews and all the rest, and women and the rest of the things he said. So somebody being inebriated doesn't give them a pass in my point of view. My labeling or calling RFK Jr. an anti-Semite isn't about this one statement. It's more about the fact that he's a conspiracy theorist. And I've yet to meet a conspiracy theorist who doesn't engage in anti-Semitic tropes on the regular. So, I mean, if it's easier to say, okay, he engages in anti-Semitic tropes, and then apologizes for them rather than label him an anti-Semite, okay, tomato, tomato, it doesn't really matter. He's also somebody that gives airtime to the likes of Louis Farrakhan. He's comfortable engaging in spaces where anti-Semitic tropes are common.
Right.
And to me, that's the litmus test. I don't need him to be Nick Fuentes calling for a religious war against Jews to call him, an anti-Semite. If it makes some people uncomfortable because he paints himself as a friend to Israel, that's understandable. But there are plenty of people that claim that they're supporters of Israel and love Israel but hate Jews.
Right. And, the question is, do we have enough evidence to say that this guy hates Jews or this guy trades in conspiracy theories? Again, I think we both agree that what he did was anti-Semitic. But I am more circumspect about calling somebody an anti-Semite because it carries a certain weight that they bring around with them all the time. So people will say, well, and by the way, one of the reasons why is that I think the left is too willing to do it with the right, and the right is too willing to do it with the left. And they both use it as a future litmus test to push people out of the conversation. So I want to be more careful because I don't want the two sides of the ideological spectrum to have too easy of a time calling the anti-Semitism from out in the other camp. That's really why I'm trying to be very careful about it.
No, I think that's fair. But then the question comes up that in order to be an anti-Semite, does somebody have to hate Jews? Because that's a very different litmus test. If that's the case, then I'm going to really like the measure is going to look more like Nick Fuentes being the measuring tool and that type of ideology. Or do they just have to engage in anti-Semitic tropes, which aren't necessarily fueled by hatred? Mostly they're fueled by conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I said that either hate Jews or that they trade in anti-Semitic tropes. So I agree that someone doesn't have to actually hate Jews or that we have to have evidence of them hating Jews for them to qualify. All right, so that's the first case study. Let's move on to the second one, and it is Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty is an organization that sprung up a couple years ago, like many of these organizations, to fight against what's happening in schools. Indoctrination in schools and the like. And it is a large, sprawling organization. There are something like 300 chapters of this new organization in just 2 years. So you can imagine that they're giving out franchises relatively easily, and they're trying to make rapid social change. Like that's what happens in times of changes, that some organizations have to show very fast growth. And so I think you're going to get a lot of always in such situations, you're going to have a problem with quality control, right? You're going to have people at the local level who say things that you wish they didn't say, or you couldn't really ferret out whether they were extremists in the first place because you gave them a franchise so easily of your organization. So with that context, there have been 4 accusations made against them in the last few weeks that given people enough evidence to call them anti-Semitic and dismiss them and try to push them out of the discourse. The first was that one local chapter in Florida tried to get the Anne Frank book, the graphic novel, out of elementary school and onto the middle school shelf. So this was a so-called book banning. Their claim was that there was some sexualized language in it. I actually went and bought the book to look at it. I mean, obviously I've read The Diary of Anne Frank, but this one is a curation of it in the form of a graphic novel. By my view, there's nothing in it that's even remotely inappropriate, but there were some, talked about her love interest in a female friend. There were some other, I guess, mildly suggestive quotes in it that were in the unabridged version of the diary. The third is that they've used a Jonathan Tobin quote. I don't think I asked Dan to pull that one out, but Jonathan Tobin is the editor of Jewish News Syndicate. They used a quote that I think JNS eventually changed, which was that defending moms for liberty. And the quote could be read as Americans and Jews are not the same. And Moms for Liberty proudly put this up because a journalist was defending them, and then people said, "Well, look, you're citing this quote, which might look like Jews aren't real Americans." And the fourth is that there's been this rumor that Moms for Liberty has has sort of said Jews are responsible for the transgender movement. And someone showed me a meme of this, or something that was supposedly on one of their social media sites. But first of all, it looked fake to me. It looked like somebody else pieced that together. It didn't look like somebody who was responsible for social media actually did it. And then it disappeared. He couldn't find it when he went back for it. So there are rumors of that, but people are talking about it as if there are not rumors. So, Brandy, anti-Semites or no?
Some of them maybe. I think it's interesting that this group is actually catching a lot of heat because of two things that they stand against: diversity programming and intersectionality. So the first one, as far as diversity, maybe if they had more diversity of thought within some of their chapters, like these are different chapters, so I'm not going to paint one whole organization when it's as one thing when it's broken up this way. But maybe if they had more diversity of thought, these things would have been caught ahead of time, instead of it going down this route of sloppiness. But on the other side, them taking issue with one book, regardless of who it's about or who it's from, for a very specific reason, falls in in line with what they stand against. They view any type of discussion about sex and gender and sexuality in one particular way. So I'm not surprised that if there was any book that alluded to this in the elementary school level, they'd want it to be moved to middle school and high school levels. That in itself isn't anti-Semitic. Quotes being taken out of context and painted a certain way. I mean, I'm not surprised that's happened to this group. You have far left groups that have labeled Moms for Liberty as a right-wing extremist group, even as a hate group. So of course, it's anything that they say and do is going to be weaponized and used against them. Again, I think that shows a bit of sloppiness on their part. And maybe if they had more diversity of thought at the decision-making level, then they would have been able to avoid those types of missteps.
Yeah, but what about that? What about that being a sloppiness on the part of the critics as well, who are looking for any evidence of somebody saying something that they can then misconstrue or sort of blow out of proportion?
I don't think it's sloppiness on the part of the critics. I think the critics have been waiting for something to then use against the group. I mean, that seems to be how it is. Everything's become hyper partisan, and these different chapters have given their opposition ammunition to use against them.
Right. So there was another part of this that I forgot to mention about Moms for Liberty. There was, in one of the local newsletters, there was a Hitler quote, and people quickly glommed onto this and said that, look, they're praising Hitler. Actually, and it's hard to see in that thing that Dan put up there, it wasn't really a praise of Hitler. It was suggesting that that the people who are trying to teach and indoctrinate kids in this way are engaging in Hitler-like tactics. That's what they were implying. Again, I think it's a ridiculous quote, but I don't think it's anti-Semitic or was meant in an anti-Semitic way. You have any different take on that?
No, I agree with you. I think it was sloppy on their part to use it, and I think that the Holocaust and Hitler get invoked entirely too often. For everybody who's bad is Hitler-like, and everything that's horrible is Holocaust-like, and it's a bit ridiculous. And again, those opposed to Moms for Liberty found this little piece of something to weaponize and use against the group to paint them as something that they were actually trying to call out their opposition for. That being said, I am cautious with any group that takes such an extreme stance against another extreme, because then we see what's happening now kind of become even more prevalent in wider society.
Right. Okay. So we've gone through Moms for Liberty. Now, I want to talk about George Soros and the trope around George Soros. Dan, can you put up the one where he's a puppet master? All right. So here's a picture of George Soros. It's, I think, on the ADL Twitter site with him as a puppet master. And the argument would be that George Soros is the trope about George Soros is really just a stand-in for Jews. It's a dog whistle that that Jews are controlling everything. Rather than say Jews and get yourself in hot water, you just say George Soros, who's like the Rothschilds. He's everybody's billionaire Jew controlling the world. And so anytime then somebody criticizes George Soros, Jan, put up the Marco Rubio quote, if you wouldn't mind. Here's Marco Rubio in a quote. He gave some testimony on the House floor. The Democrats just blocked my effort to try and force Soros-backed prosecutors to put dangerous criminals in jail. So the argument, particularly on the progressive left, would be that when Marco Rubio tapped into that trope about George Soros, he was engaging in a kind of anti-Semitism. And there was, following that tweet, accusations of anti-Semitism. So, Brandy, what do you make of this?
I think that both can be true. I think that it can be true that that the trope against, George Soros can be the stand-in for the all-powerful Jewish cabal or whatever, like the Rothschilds. And there's an issue with George Soros-backed prosecutors. Both can be true. So some people, of course, are going to use George Soros as a dog whistle, just like like people on the far left use Israel as a dog whistle instead of saying Jews or Zionists. It goes both ways. That being said, that doesn't mean that specific quote that Senator Rubio stated was him engaging in anti-Semitic dog whistling. He was talking about something very specific at that time. I don't know, but again, I don't. If somebody can, the same with RFK Jr. If somebody continues kind of this repeated pattern, I'm going to lean towards, all right, walks like a duck, talks like a duck.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a difference between those two images that we showed you. One is of Soros controlling everything. That really does call in sort of the traditional anti-Semitic trope of the Jew controlling the world. It may be that some people, and I've heard this from many people, will look at that and not even understand that Soros is a Jew there. I mean, it's very possible that they could innocently just think that there's a wicked progressive billionaire controlling the whole world, and everybody is a puppet. So I don't necessarily think it would mean that the person who would share such a trope is automatically an anti-Semite. So it wouldn't take me down to like number 2 on that list. It would keep me at number 3. But certainly, I think a billionaire who does in fact spend a lot of money on prosecutor campaigns has really made that a priority. I mean, they're fair game, right? They're like you cannot say, well, that person can't be talked about in the public domain. And I don't think that when the way that Rubio used it in that is anti-Semitic in any way. Again, if he constantly did it and he did the puppeteer stuff too, maybe it would cross into it, as you were saying. But I don't see any evidence of that. I think that can be a sloppy use of the A word, in my view. All right. Number 4, and our final case study. Maybe we'll actually end in 30 minutes, which would be crazy because we have so much here. Pramila Jayapal, of course, the Congresswoman. This week, I think she was speaking, or last week, she was speaking to a Palestinian solidarity gathering of some sort. And she said that Israel is a racist state. Those were the words that she used. Now, she was obviously called out for this, and later sort of said that she didn't mean that the whole country was racist, but that rather policies under the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are racist. And then she did go ahead and vote. That's the statement that she released, which sort of tries to clarify. I don't think it's big enough for people to see it. So Dan, maybe we'll take that down. But she did vote for the resolution that emphatically said that Israel is an ally of the United States, whereas some of her Democratic colleagues, like in the squad and the like, voted against it. I think there were 9 Democrats who voted against that. So she showed some contrition, and now she's also allied with some organizations. She's also done some work, I understand, with the Council of American Islamic Relations, and she doesn't always hang out with the most thoughtful people in the world. Brandy, what do you think? Is she an anti-Semite? Is what she said anti-Semitic first?
Yes.
And is okay?
Yes to both.
Yes,
And
sir.
I mean, I say that without hesitation because this isn't the first time that she's engaged in this type of behavior. She was presenting an idea to block the endorsement from the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party, block their endorsing of Democratic candidates who took money from the Democratic majority for Israel. That's just one instance. This isn't she's a repeat offender, and she's one who uses Israel or Zionists as a dog whistle for Jews. Now, she tried to clean up this latest statement and say she meant that the current, Netanyahu-led government is the racist part of whatever ridiculous statement she made. But she's been doing this even when there were other governments in power. Her issue isn't only with Benjamin Netanyahu. Her issue has been consistently with the state of Israel existing. And she engages in tropes against the state of Israel, against Zionists, against Jews. And in engaging in those tropes, she spreads lies about them. So her statement, to me, the biggest issue wasn't that she said that Israel's a racist state. She said that they're working to prove or to show that Israel's a racist state. So working to prove and show it, including engaging in the lies she keeps engaging in about Israel and Zionism and the Jewish state, because that's been her pattern of behavior. And
Right.
of course, she voted for, this resolution that, 9 far left Democrats voted against, saying Israel's our ally. But what she didn't do is encourage those members of her caucus, the Progressive Caucus, which she's the leader of, and also aligning their votes with her.
Yeah, and let's spend a little time on this idea of apology and contrition and so forth. I think it's in our general interest, most of the time, not all the time, to let people off the hook because it affords sort of a quote unquote teaching moment, right? Like, there was a few years ago, there was a DC City Council member who talked about the Rothschilds and weather and whatever. I don't know that he knew what he was saying. And afterwards, he apologized profusely and so forth. I think the apology itself served the purpose of raising awareness about the dangers of anti-Semitism. So I do think we have an abiding interest in letting people off the hook when possible. But there are times when we might not want to do that because the person, as you said, is a repeat offender and is just going to use it to continue doing what they've always done. What do you think about apologies?
No, I think there's a difference between somebody just saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," and not being sincere, and somebody sincerely recognizing that what they did was wrong and trying to make amends for it. I agree with you. I think I'm not, oh, one strike, get out of here, cancel this person, censor them. All anyone needs to do is look at the Congresswoman's words and her actions and her votes, and let them make. Everyone can make their mind up. I'm someone who believes that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. So with that belief, she's a proud anti-Zionist. I mean, that's one of the, the kind of the points on the test is something anti-Semitic that I would include. She's open in her belief that Israel should not exist as a Jewish democratic state.
Right. So is she? By the way, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that she's highly critical, but has she crossed over and said that Israel should not exist as a Jewish state?
Well, no, she hasn't said it in those words. She's used other terms and other words just to make the same point.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other topic, right? And maybe we'll spend some more time in a future podcast or live stream, sort of fleshing all that out. Yeah, look, I think that what she said was anti-Semitic. I think it's very possible and probably likely that she's an anti-Semite. Would I ever, if I was running a mainstream Jewish organization, she asked to come and speak and clarify with my board of directors, would I allow her to do it? I think I probably would. There are people I wouldn't necessarily do it with. I think sometimes anti-Semitism can be so explicit, or racism can be so explicit, that it's really hard to climb down on, that you really feel like you've gotten a window into that person's mind, and everything else that they've said from that point is BS. I remember years ago when Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, and I don't remember the exact statement, made a racist statement. And he ended up resigning from it. I think part of the problem was that it was so obvious and so explicit that you couldn't believe anything. Like the apology really rang hollow because it felt like he had already expressed his authentic point of view. There was no way around that. So sometimes I think somebody's stuck with something that they've said in public. It's very hard for anybody to believe an apology because it was so succinctly articulated in such an obvious window into their mind. But that being said, I'd let a lot of people off the hook when it doesn't quite rise to that level.
I mean, I don't disagree that having a conversation with somebody, even if they've made statements like the Congresswoman Jayapal made. I'm not saying that I wouldn't want to have a conversation with her, or she shouldn't be able to speak. I wouldn't want that to give legitimacy to anything that she said that's anti-Semitic or that's bigoted. But the conversation is, I'm a firm believer in free speech. That also doesn't mean that having a conversation with her from me is letting her off the hook.
Right. You could continue to challenge her.
Yeah, maybe it's holding her more accountable for the things that she's said and the policies that she stands by and encourages.
Yeah. There's also cases where somebody really did engage in something extremely anti-Semitic or racist, like let's say a KKK person, white supremacist and the like, and yet they've actually really repented to the degree that they've worked to fight it. We've seen that the filmmaker Dia Khan went went in with the Charlottesville neo-Nazis, and some of them really got to know the first quote-unquote brown person that they've ever met and really left the fold as a result of that and expressed real contrition afterwards. To me, I'd say welcome to the world of the civilized, yes, what you did was racist. Yes, you were a racist, but you're no longer a racist or you're no longer an anti-Semite.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets to the heart of, can people be reformed if from having a negative position or belief, can they reform themselves? I'm happy that happens. I believe that people can. That doesn't mean I'm going to be the one that's working actively to let that, let somebody with more patience take that part. And my hat's off to them to be able to do that. I think it's important and necessary. The other part of it is that there's an element of sincerity. It's easy for a politician to take a misstep and then issue some sort of apology or statement. But for them, they have a lot more on the line than someone else when they just make a misstep or a misstatement.
Exactly. Good point. All right. Well, I think we've really done justice here, and fleshed this out. I think we mostly agree. There might be a couple of points where we're not exactly on the same page, but that is the nature of contrarianism. So thank you all for being with us. Shabbat shalom. Until next time.
Shabbat shalom.